Okay, today we are going to be talking about John 11. And this has been just a wonderful chapter for me. I started studying for this chapter as I spent a week in Minnesota last week and I was studying for this chapter, and I had downloaded, because I didn't know what my internet connection was going to be like as I traveled. And I had downloaded like 30 pages of commentary and just different things like that. And I was reading through it. Finally, I just got to the point where I was so overwhelmed by the academics of it, how much symbolism and all this stuff was in this chapter, that I just had to put everything aside and just focus on what did this mean to me, and how was it going to make a difference in my life, and how would it make a difference in your life. So we're going to start out briefly with just a review of chapter 10. That to me was an impactful chapter. It was an amazing revelation of Jesus's love for us. Jesus told us stories of sheep, shepherds, sheep pen and gates, and it all symbolized his relationship with us. Like sheep, we are totally helpless, and we need a good shepherd to survive and to thrive. Jesus told us he's not only our good shepherd, but he's also our gate, which is a security. Nothing can get to us except it has to come through him. But most amazing of all was Jesus's clear teaching that he loves his sheep, drum roll, as much as he loves his Father. So I want to tell you a little bit about chapter 11. I want to give you the heads up because there's some really fascinating things to look for in this chapter. John 11 is like a novel in one chapter. It has an introduction, 3 acts, and a conclusion. And so in the introduction, he's going to set the stage and he's going to tell us the reason for the conflict that's coming up. Then we're going to be introduced to the disciples who are growing in their faith and trust in God's leading. Then we will talk about the family at the center of this drama and how Jesus is healing their hearts and giving life. And then the final act is going to be the Jews from Jerusalem. They get another opportunity to believe. And finally, we get the conclusion, the purpose for this chapter. And embedded within all of this, this is Jesus's last recorded miracle in the book of John. And so embedded within this last and greatest miracle are going to be numerous other references to the other miracles. So John has been a pastor for many, many, many years when he writes this book. He's probably in his 80s. He was in his mid-teens maybe as what he's recording in this book happened when he was in his mid-teens or so. So chapter 11 is going to be a sermon. Not only is it a book within a chapter, it's a sermon in a story. And so I want to give you a roadmap for interpreting this story. And here's my roadmap. I once read a book where a struggling author attended a writer's conference, and a best-selling author took that writer aside and gave her these comments on her book. Your characters aren't believable, she said, because nothing bad ever happens to them. No one can relate to someone who's perfect like that. Your story needs tension and conflict and drama. And if you wanted to be a best-selling author, it requires vulnerable characters who face and struggle to overcome daunting problems. So I listened to that. I was listening to the book on tape, and I thought, wow, that's a great lesson. I need to teach that to the girls that I'm mentoring. There were a couple of young ladies that I was mentoring at the time. And as always seems to be the case, when I have a message that I want to teach to somebody else, God takes me through an object lesson. And I had to face this in real life. So I found that it's easier to teach than it is to live. So this was right about the time that we were moving from Austin to Phoenix. And the sale of our Austin house was just amazing. Everything was just falling into place. And I was going, yay, wow, look at what God's doing. Everything is just going so smoothly until it wasn't. And we just like hit a brick wall. And I remember thinking about this best-selling author's response to this struggling author. Do you want a best-selling author or not? as God is writing your book, he has to let problems be introduced so you can overcome them. He really wants to write a best-selling novel in my life. And am I going to let him write that? Or am I going to choose to worry and to fret and be one of those characters that you don't want to read about at all? So I resolved that I was going to let God have a chance. Was it easy? No. When I chose to trust, when I chose to replace worry with trust and faith in my Lord and Savior, it was very difficult. But you know what? Now that I'm 2.5 years on the other side of this, I'm so glad that that is my testimony, that I chose to trust. So as you read John chapter 11, his best-selling novel, cheer on the characters, have faith, don't be afraid. Jesus is coming. It's going to be okay at the end of the chapter. Why can you do that? Because the author has given you information about the other characters and you've read the end of the chapter. You know what the author has in mind. So this is the story of Jesus's disciples, of Mary and Martha, and a few of their friends from Jerusalem. It's a story of problems encountered and overcome. It has become a blockbuster bestseller, and it's a pattern for us yet today. Let's start with John 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. The most natural reaction in the world, right? So I want to set the stage because in order for you to fully get the impact of this current story, I want you to be familiar with another story from Luke 10 when we are introduced to Mary and Martha. So I'm just going to quickly read that. Jesus came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. So we're introduced to this story from Luke 10, 2 sisters very different in nature. The reason why John assumes that we're familiar with them is because the earlier Gospels were written many years ago and have received wide circulation. So he is pretty sure that his readers are familiar with these sisters. It is those 2 sisters that now urgently send word to Jesus. And they think about what is going to motivate Jesus to come and heal Lazarus. The sisters know that Jesus's love for them and for Lazarus is his greatest strength and their greatest comfort. So that's what they appeal to Jesus in this time of greatest need. Notice, they made the problem known to Jesus, but they didn't suggest a solution. Here we see a throwback to Mary in chapter 2, when Jesus's mother brings the need. They've run out of wine at a wedding, likely one of Mary's relatives. She comes to him and says, they have no more wine. This is a catastrophe. So in both cases, the situation is so dire that the women didn't even attempt to offer a suggestion for fixing it. How difficult do you think that was for strong women to do? Only Jesus could fix this problem. Now, notice what it says in this verse. This sickness will not end in death. No, it. What is the it referring to there? It, the sickness, is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified. Again, we see a parallel to the story of the blind man in chapter 9. this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. What's it referring to there? The man's blindness. Now, I just wanted to make sure, because sometimes people struggle with this. They get people that come up to them and say, you know, you're sick because you don't have enough faith to believe. Or what did you do to deserve this? And I'm just telling you, John tells us clearly here and in John chapter 9 that sickness isn't caused by God, but it can be used by God for his glory. And you know, actually, all sickness for believers, it is God's will for them to be healed. Sometimes it just takes heaven for that to happen. Now, Jesus loved Mary and her sister and Lazarus. Now, when we read these two verses, I want you to think of that Sesame Street ditty. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. You know that one? That's what these two verses, John is singing when he's writing these verses. Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And when he heard he was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. What does not make sense in that? John wants to make sure we understand the drama. Jesus gets a message and it's like, he ignores it. What's going on with that? And just so that we understand, he waits where he is 2 more days, and it's a 2-day journey over there. So the Bible tells us that when he gets to Bethany, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. So the day he gets this message, Lazarus has he's either already dead or about ready to die in the next few minutes. What's up with this? Jesus loved this family, yet he waited before outwardly responding. Why did Jesus prolong the agony for Mary and Martha? And I have to think about our best-selling novel. Do we ask that same question? Could it be that God knows something we don't? He knows the end of the book. He knows how he wants to write this. This is all the characteristics of a best-selling novel. And then he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. Don't you know that the disciples' hearts sank at that? But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. Now we come to the first act, the disciples. The disciples were probably thrilled to death when Jesus didn't immediately get up upon receiving that note and say, hey guys, pack your bags, let's go to Bethany. Their relief is short-lived. He appears to reconsider, and the disciples go, wait a minute, don't you remember? Your picture is on the most wanted in every post office from here to Jerusalem. And as he did before he healed the blind man, Jesus tells them that he must do his Father's work while it is day, while he is still on earth. It seemed like such a weird response when they say, you know, there's danger. And Jesus responds not by saying, oh, no, don't worry about it. I've got it covered. I know. He says, no, there are 12 hours of daylight. He says, I am walking in the daylight of my Father's will, in the daylight of my Father's plan for me. There is no place better for me to be. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, guys. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. When Jesus announced he was going to wake Lazarus up, his disciples were confused, as I would have been. Jesus is, there's just never a dull moment with Jesus. So they said, hey, he's sleeping. That's a really good thing. He's going to get better. And then, if you're going to go anyway, why did you wait? And finally, why are you even going at all? You've healed from a distance before. Do you remember miracle number 2 in John chapter 4 when he told the nobleman, he said, your son is healed, go. It's 30 miles away, just go. I know he's healed. He's healed before at a distance. Why can't he do that here? The delay allowed tensions to rise and hope to fade as Jesus penned a best-selling novel. Jewish tradition taught that a person's spirit hovered over a body for 3 days after death, hoping to re-enter the body. The spirit departed on the 4th day when, according to Jewish tradition, it saw decay starting to happen, and all hope was gone for that reuniting of the body and the spirit. So twice before, Jesus has raised someone from the dead shortly after they died. We see that in Mark 5 and Luke 7. This, and people maybe, the skeptics maybe said, well, they were just in a coma. He didn't really heal them. He just, he threw some cold water on them, brought them back to life. Well, this time, Jesus waited until the 4th day when their Jewish tradition said, no way is he coming back. His body is already starting to decay. But Jesus told the disciples that he could be glad even in the death of a friend because he knew what this situation was about to become. He knew what he alone could do. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. And, I just kind of picture when Thomas says that. Remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh? It's going to rain today. So it's just everything is doom and gloom. And that's how I pictured Thomas in this. But he is willing to go along with Jesus. Thomas in Hebrew means twin. And Didymus is its Greek equivalent. So John, he seldom records the specific words of specific disciples. So when he not only records his words, but also says his name twice, let's look for the significance in that. Thomas reflects Jesus's nature. Thomas is Jesus's twin because he is willing to go and die to help another. Thomas, like Jesus, shows us that we can trust God's leading, even when it doesn't make a lick of sense. And here's the deal. The reason why the disciples are kind of distraught over this suggestion is that Jesus is their job. They have left everything to follow him. There's no unemployment security here. They don't have any unemployment insurance that they can draw on. So now, why is he putting himself and them in such unnecessary danger? John and the rest of the disciples never forgot Jesus's words to them. Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. That was back in John 8, and again he repeats it. I am the light of the world. Anyone who follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. This is the important thing to consider as we look forward into the coming chapters. The disciples will soon need this dramatic example of walking in the daylight of God's timing and his will. In just a few days, maybe short months, they're going to see Jesus go to the cross. And a few short months after that, these same disciples, these clueless men, are going to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And these humble, uneducated men will turn the world upside down with the light of God's word. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their son. So, oh no, this is a problem of huge proportions. Jesus returns to a place close to Jerusalem where many Jews from Jerusalem are gathered. And this is not good. He needs to keep a low profile, and what he's about to do just ain't gonna cut low profile mentality. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world." Let's break this down. Now, in Luke 10, Jesus had rebuked Martha for serving out of duty instead of love. Unless you're a Martha, you don't understand what that means and how that feels. The truth of that rebuke stings. You feel like what you have to offer isn't good enough. The Marys in your life are always better than you. They always get the attention. So Marthas hide behind to-do lists. Marthas thrive in seeing a challenge and seeing a task and doing it well. They seek approval in what they do, not in who they are. And Jesus was guiding Martha to turn away from tasks which don't satisfy to relationships which nourish the soul. So Martha has processed what Jesus has taught her in Luke 10. And let's look at the progression. Here, Jesus' star pupil is Martha. She gets several verses in this chapter to Mary's one. So I want you to pay attention to Martha's progressive healing in this chapter. When word came that Jesus was near, it was Martha, not Mary, who immediately got up, left the house, and went out to meet him. Do you see how relationships are starting to matter to her? Then let's take a look at what she says. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha feels free to tell Jesus exactly how she feels. You have to feel safe with someone in order for you to talk like that. "If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." Jesus, you just didn't make it in time. What is up? Why? But she follows it up. "I know God answers your prayers." And you know what she's saying? I know he answers your prayers. He just doesn't answer mine. That's why I needed you here. He doesn't answer my prayers. I needed you to pray for him. Martha had a defective view of Jesus. Did you hear her say this? "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." She told Jesus she knew he was heard by God. She didn't think that he was God yet. He was simply a close friend who had unprecedented access to God. Here's the cool thing. Even when our theology isn't perfect, Jesus responds to our faith. And so Jesus gave her an amazing promise. Your brother will rise again. Martha still did not understand, nor would I have understood, that this promise given by Jesus that day was for that day. So I want you to picture this. Imagine Martha and Jesus standing and talking. The posture that they had, Mary, her head downcast. Jesus, the compassion oozing from him. As they stood there talking, as Martha opened her heart and let Jesus see her pain and her struggle to trust. And then Jesus gave her and all believers a promise that wasn't just for today, but it was for all of eternity. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, let's go back to our Sesame Street days and let's pretend topic. I'm going to read you the next sentence, and I want you to pretend that I'm going to read that next sentence, and you're going to have to write a paragraph on what that means. So listen carefully. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Okay, process that. So first of all, Jesus claimed to be, not simply have resurrection and life. And then that second sentence just seems circular in nature. It's it's just so weird. Some live and then die while others live and never die. It's like, oh, what does that mean? Who's on first? You know? And so Jesus asked Martha, do you believe this? It was like he had quoted from a quantum physics textbook, and he goes, Martha, do you believe this? And she's going, yeah, sure, whatever that was you said, yeah, that's what I believe. That's what I believe. But you know what? She doesn't try to fake it. Like the blind man, she just responded with what she knew. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God who is to come into the world. Do you see, even yet, her theology is defective. She didn't comprehend that the scope of his claim was not one who was coming into the world, but that he was here, standing before her. Jesus wanted her to believe he was who he claimed to be. He could do what he said he could do, not just for the future, but for your right now. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Does that sound familiar? Martha had called Mary secretly, possibly because she knew Jesus's life was in danger, or maybe she wanted to give Mary a few minutes of privacy with Jesus. That didn't work because the mourners followed Mary to Jesus. But when Mary got to Jesus, she fell at his feet and said the exact same thing that Martha had said. How many times do you suppose the sisters had said that to each other in the 4 days since Lazarus had died? Only Jesus had been here. If only he could have done something about this. I'm just wondering, what do you think her tone was, her intention when she asked those words? Was there maybe a hint of accusation, or was she just, okay, God, I know if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. You did have that power. But regardless of what they meant, in their time of need, both sisters ran to Jesus, and Jesus met them right there where they were without condemnation. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? What's up with that? The Jews had this tradition back then, and culture said that the more unrestrained the weeping, the more honor it paid to the dead. So you have to get this picture that they would even hire professional mourners to come in, and there would just be this hysterical weeping and wailing, and oh my goodness, how much honor that was showing poor Lazarus, who couldn't hear a word of it. Seeing their grief, Jesus was deeply moved and troubled. Now we're going to see different progressions. This is just an emotional time for Jesus. He goes from being deeply moved and troubled, implying anger and indignation, to a more quiet grief. But right here, this is implying anger, the deeply moved and troubled. It seems to indicate that Jesus was angry at the power death had over the people he loved. He was troubled at the pain it caused those that he sincerely loved and cared for. When we get to the Jesus wept in chapter 30, in verse 35, it's more of a quiet weeping, a deep internal grieving. Jesus didn't have to weep hysterically because he knew the end of the story. He knew he had come to correct the problem. But here also in this last passage, we get a look at the division among the Jews from Jerusalem. We get on one side, oh, look how much he loved Lazarus. He's weeping over his death. And on the other hand, the sarcastic skeptics, he could have healed him. Why didn't he come sooner? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. Oh, but Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's going to be a bad odor. He's been in there for 4 days. It's going to stink if you take that stone away. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you, Martha, that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Martha clearly did not know that Jesus's miracle was for her and Lazarus today. But Jesus did not need Martha's faith to perform this miracle. How many times have you heard it said, oh, you just need to have faith. You just need to. Jesus doesn't need our faith to perform miracles. What he needs our faith for is for us to see the glory of God. So Martha could believe, have faith in what Jesus was going to do, and participate in and experience the glory of God's Son as this miracle came to be, and her brother was restored to her. But do you know, many of the Jews that day saw that exact same miracle and they missed the glory. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said, take off the grave clothes and let him go. When Jesus came to the tomb and said, roll away the stone, I'm sure the people around him said, does he want to see Lazarus one more time? Is that why he wants? I mean, it's kind of a weird, morbid thought. But if he needs to see him one more time to settle his grief, that's okay. So they roll away the stone. And then Jesus does the unexpected. Aren't those wonderful words? Then Jesus. Do you need a then Jesus moment in your life? Lazarus is a physical demonstration of a spiritual truth. Lazarus was dead. He responded to Jesus calling his name, and he received life, just like us. We were spiritually dead. Jesus calls our name, and we say, yes, Lord, I believe, and he gives us new life in him. But here's the deal. Even alive men can wear grave clothes. Lazarus rose from the grave wearing grave clothes. It's clothes that only dead men wear. And we receive resurrection life through believing and trusting in Jesus, but we may still be bound up by our own dead men clothes, legalism and the law. Clothes for the dead don't look good on the living. Legalism and the law are stinky clothes, and you can't walk freely in Jesus with them on. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done, those tattletales. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. So the reaction of the Jews watching the miracle that day was split. Some believed and trusted, others went and tattled. The chief priests and the Pharisees called an immediate emergency session of Israel's Supreme Court, which was the Sanhedrin. And there was only one topic on the agenda that day. What are we going to do about Jesus? They had in the past had these ad hoc death committees where in the moment they would pick up stones and try to kill him. No more. It's going to be a planned, calculated attack, and they are going to see that Jesus is killed. Because Jesus might start a revolution with his growing numbers of supporters. If that happened, the Romans would send their troops to put down the rebellion, and they knew what that looked like, and it was not pretty. It was a very painful sight. Their temple would be destroyed. And here is their most important consideration. The priests and the Pharisees would lose their jobs and their influence. They were not going to let that happen. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Caiaphas, the high priest, spoke up. You know nothing at all. Do you hear this? There's some division. He's not going to say something like that unless there is divided opinions. Do we hear our friend Nicodemus being the opposing point of view at this point? And then Caiaphas went on to appeal to their selfish nature. It's better for you. My plan is for your job security. He spoke prophetically without realizing it. He spoke of the physical here and now. If Jesus died, the Romans wouldn't get involved. The Jews would be left alone to live their lives in peace. And this plan that Caiaphas was concocting would save the temple and the nation. Ironically, the physical temple and the nation would be destroyed 40 years later, completely destroyed. Their temporary plan only saved them for another 40 years. But you know what? Caiaphas was right. It was better that one man die for the people. And Jesus died not just for their nation, but for whosoever will, for the whole world. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple courts, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the festival at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it, so they might arrest him. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he raised his profile so high that the religious leaders could no longer tolerate him. They declared Jesus guilty and issued a warrant for his arrest. The Passover was at hand. The Passover when the Israelites celebrated their deliverance from slavery in Egypt. And to commemorate that event, a perfect, innocent lamb would be slain and its blood shed to redeem innocent lives. So here's a chapter 11 summary for us. God wants to write a best-selling novel with us as the main characters in our own book. You get your own book. We must meet and overcome obstacles with the author's help. And this is our comfort. Only God sees the big picture. Only God understands things we don't. And so as the disciples learned, when we walk with Jesus, we walk in the light. Jesus longs to heal our hearts and raise us from the dead. Healing starts with trusting Jesus, being honest with our pain, having humility to trust him. We also need to understand that we need to believe that problems are not punishment and delays are not denials of his love. Lazarus was a temporary picture of our permanent state. When we respond to Jesus's calling, we will never die spiritually. The life we live spiritually is Jesus living in us. As long as Jesus lives, we will live. Do you need your direction? Do you need Jesus to give you direction and hope? Does your heart need healing? Jesus is for right now, today. Do you believe that? And if you do, you will see God's glory. Or do you choose not to? The choice is ours on how our best-selling novel, with our author's help, will be written. And then I wanted to give you a quick sneak preview. The rest of John, John 12 through 21, the rest of it is devoted to the last week of Jesus's life. The time to fulfill the significance of yet one more Jewish festival, the Passover, has come. Jesus continues to walk in the light of his Father's plan, secure in his love, even as he faces the unimaginable horror of his upcoming trial and crucifixion. He's going to attend a dinner in his honor at Bethany, and then he's going to go back to Jerusalem as events will rapidly unfold in his path to the cross.